Yo, what's going on YouTube, and welcome back to Goal Line Hockey. It's your boy, Kevin Forte, and we have a good one for you today as the Chicago Blackhawks. It's been a rough season for the Hawks. There were high expectations of this team coming into this year. It seems like an eternity ago, considering the staff, the personnel that is in this organization. It is completely different. Stan Bowman's gone. Jeremy Colleton is gone. So their general manager, their head coach, a bunch of other scouting guys, all gone. A lot of change has occurred in Chicago. And there seems to be a new mentality on the team. And we started to see that at the locker room clean out. We'll go over some things for the Chicago Blackhawks. Do they maybe trade some of their star players? And if so, who? For what? What do they need to do to fix this team to be at least a legitimate team that can be considered? Maybe not a playoff team, but they're starting to go in a new direction, in the right direction. We're going to get a lot of those things answered this summer for the Blackhawks. So let's get right into it. So the first thing we're going to go over is the new head coach of the Chicago Blackhawks. Their interim head coach replacing Jeremy Colleton at the end of the season was Derek King. He came up, he was the head coach of the Rockford IceHogs, similar to how Jeremy Colleton got his gig with the Blackhawks just a few seasons ago. Derek King has been pretty good, but things have not gone great for this team. And I could see them as they get further along here, closer to the draft, they will look in a new direction. And I don't think Derek King will not be considered, but I just don't think maybe he's not ready to be a head coach, but definitely not at the National Hockey League level. Maybe he becomes an assistant or again goes back to Rockford. Those are the sort of conversations we'll see. And then if it's not Derek King, well, who are some of the other options out there? And I have three. I think there's three somewhat legitimate options, truthfully, here for the Hawks. Some of them are a little bit more outlandish. Some of them are more realistic. It depends on the mindset of the Blackhawks and where they want to go. Now, if they want to stay in-house, I think Derek King could be an option. Another option is Brian Campbell. He's a younger coach. He doesn't have a ton of coaching experience, but he's been with this organization through the Stanley Cup championships. He actually won a cup with the Blackhawks just a few seasons ago. So he's still a fairly new head coach, if that were the direction they would go in. And he's already an assistant coach in the organization. So Derek King and Brian Campbell, if you want to stay in-house, those are two names you could probably assume would be in the conversation. Now, the second you start to look on the open market, I think there's a couple of different guys, but I think truthfully there's really two. And I think this one's a little bit of a stretch because I think they're trying to get away from these type of head coaches. If they want the guy that's got a ton of experience, a veteran head coach, look no further than a guy like Mike Babcock. He did really well with the Red Wings, was a huge part of their success in the late, really during their kind of playoff appearances in the mid-2000s and 2010s. A lot of that was on Mike Babcock. And he was taking over a pretty big regime there with Stan Bowman behind the bench and a couple of other Hall of Fame coaching staffs throughout that tenure. Babcock would be an interesting guy to come in. I think the Blackhawks are a team that could make the playoffs next year. I don't think it's realistic. I mean, you look at if they were to add to this roster, it's not unfeasible to think that could happen. But I think they are looking to blow it up, and that's what Kyle Davidson said. So maybe Mike Babcock, if they do decide to go that rebuild route, then it wouldn't seem like Babcock would be in the equation for that. But we've seen him go through rebuilds before. Didn't really work too well in Toronto. But if you're looking for that hard-ass kind of head coach, he could help them with that. And kind of going along that same vein, a guy like John Tortorella, he wants to be a head coach somewhere. Could Torts be a head coach in Chicago? Again, it's more that old mentality, mindset, that little bit of a hard-ass kind of getting on players. I think that's starting to get out of the NHL today. I think with Kyle Davidson, I think they will try to avoid that sort of situation. So I think, again, Babcock and Tortorella may get interviewed, but I don't think they're the best fit for the Blackhawks. The best fit, I think, for the Blackhawks is a guy that just got released last week. And he is from Detroit. He spent 7 seasons with the Red Wings. And I think a very underrated guy. And unfortunately, he was there for the bad years in Detroit. And he kind of suffered through that. Jeff Blashill, I think, is a guy that I think he's going to end up going to one of two teams, truthfully. I think there's two teams that are really going to be on his radar. And one of them being the Blackhawks. I think the Blackhawks are a great fit for a guy like Blashill. He's got a little bit of experience. He's in the newer vein of coaching staffs like in today's game. So I think he's one of those guys that's going to be bouncing. He's going to be a guy that's well represented. And I think that the reason that Eisman wanted to keep him last year was because he felt that he had the capability to get this team to that next level. And had the Red Wings not gone on that terrible run at the end of this season, I think Blashill would have stayed in Detroit. But I think the message got old, got a little stale. He's been there 7 years, no real playoff success. I think Blashill coming to Chicago would be a perfect fit. And I think, truthfully, that is the only legitimate option that I truthfully see right now. Now, if guys start to leave this summer, if DeBoer gets fired by Vegas, we probably would have seen that already. If Bruce Boudreau doesn't figure something out with the Vancouver Canucks, that's a guy I could look at. I even think of a guy like the Flyers head coach, Alain Vigneault. Kind of fits that same bill as a guy like Babcock or Tortorella. But Vigneault would be an interesting guy. And the only reason I don't see Vigneault working here, though, is he is more of that, like, he's the guy that can get you past the first round and on a deep playoff run, like he did with the Flyers, the Rangers, and the Canucks. I don't think the Blackhawks are in that position. But those are just some of the names that are going to be thrown out there. So that gets us to what is the core of the Chicago Blackhawks, and that's going to lead us to our next topic, which is trade assets. The core of this team, I believe, is going to be Seth Jones and Kirby Dach. I truthfully believe that is what they're going to build this organization around in the next 5 years. Seth Jones just signed that big contract. Whether he likes it or hates it, he's stuck in Chicago now. And Kirby Dach, obviously their third overall pick they got in the 2019 NHL draft. So those are your two guys. And then I look at more secondary guys, and we're going to look at this in a year from now and say this is stupid, but I think guys that had small roles on the team will start to get bigger roles. Guys like Taylor Radish and Boris Tkachuk will get more of an opportunity. And the only reason I say those guys in particular is because they just traded for them this year. So I think that under this regime, they do like those players, and I think they are going to want to keep them around. Tkachuk has been playing top minutes on the penalty kill, and Taylor Radish has been on the power play. And you subtract some of these guys that I'm going to talk about in a second, higher-end guys that are lower on the depth chart start to move their way up. I think both Tkachuk and Radish could maybe get their spot in the top six. Definitely the middle six. Definitely third or fourth. Definitely not third or fourth line like they have been playing. I think it will be between the second and third line for those guys, which is improvement for them. And maybe even Radish first line minutes. Who knows? Depending on how much of this thing they blow up this year. So Kyle Davidson said he wants to make massive changes to the organization. And with that, what are the trade assets? And you may be wondering, well, why do they want to trade these players? They need more high-end speed and talent, and younger talent, truthfully. If their window is the next 5-6 years, you want guys that are going to be in a position where they're either going into their prime or in their prime at that time. And I think 5 years is being... honestly, that's kind of quick. And you look at a rebuild that just happened recently. The Rangers 5 years ago gave out that letter, and that was a solid rebuild. They didn't really have many hiccups, and that still took 5 years. So you're looking at, with the Blackhawks, at best you're looking at 5 years if everything goes correctly. Now again, they do also have guys that could speed that up. If you were to trade a Patrick Kane, if you were to trade an Alex DeBrincat, those guys are going to bring a lot of value to you. So it may be a quicker rebuild in terms of getting guys that can get you back in quicker. So they may be closer to that 5-year window if you're being optimistic. So that's what we're talking about here. So the reason is they don't really have the draft picks or prospects right now. I mean, you look at their top prospects, Colton Dach. He led the prospect pool in points this year. Colton Dach, Lucas Reichel, Nolan Allen, defenseman. Trying to see anybody else that really stands out. I mean, Evan Barrett. I think he played for I want to say Penn State. That name looks familiar. You guys can tell me down below. But Evan Barrett, he's from Bristol, PA. He's definitely a Penn State guy. Yeah, he's got to be. Yes, we played at Penn State. Yeah, so, I mean, those are the kind of guys that you're looking at here for the Blackhawks. They don't have a really super great, Wyatt Kalynuk. I mean, these are guys we've been talking about for years, so I just don't see them as real prospects at this point. And then you have some of the guys that are kind of fringe players, like Kachuk, like Radish, Mackenzie Entwistle, Philip Kurashev. You could argue that those guys are prospects or not. Even Alex Vlasic, who came over from BU, and he played at the end of the season. He played a lot of minutes. So I don't know what they see in Alec Regula, but I think that's a guy that's going to be kind of interesting to follow up with. So then, like I said, well, if you want to get more younger players and draft picks and prospects, you have to give up talent, and that's kind of what you're doing here. You're looking at guys like Dylan Strome, Dominic Kubalik, I think are two of the maybe lesser names that we're going to talk about, but Dylan Strome, even if he gets you a 4th and a 5th round pick, like at this point, just move this guy. I think it's best for him. I think it's best for the team that they do something like that. Just let him move on. I think that's really something that is he needs a fresh start. And I think ever since he came over from the Coyotes, he had to get that stink of that top 10 draft pick, and he could never live up to that potential. He tried to do that in Chicago, just really couldn't get it going. He had a good start and then just fell off. So I don't know what to think of Dylan Strome, but that's a guy. Dominic Kubalik is a guy that brings you some value. I think Kubalik could go for something considering, he did play good minutes on the Blackhawks. He was playing on the second line. And not to mention he played on the second power play. So he did get a lot of minutes for the Blackhawks. Again, this is at the end of the season when the team was kind of blown up. But that's kind of what you're looking at with Kubalik. Could potential to be a top 6 player and has some potential. And then we get to the 3 big boys. And that is obviously Alex DeBrincat, Captain Jonathan Toews, and Patrick Kane. So the thing with those guys is DeBrincat, Toews, and Kane all have 1 year left on their contract. Their contracts will expire in the summer of 2023. And I don't see them keeping really any of the 3. And I think at this point, DeBrincat and Kane are kind of a package. Like they're kind of treating it that way. I don't know if that's how it's going to turn out, but that's what you're looking at. And now here's the other thing. You look at their ages, right? Toews is 34, Kane is 33. And like I talked about earlier, optimistically, you're looking at a 5-year window. Toews is going to be 39-40, and Toews at best will be 38-39 as well. You're asking for too much from guys. They're going to be out of their window at that point. And maybe Kane is still playing, but realistically, that's not what you're looking at here. So Patrick Kane and Toews are just not a part of the equation. So I don't see them re-signing. Definitely not Toews. He's been very vocal, even in the locker room cleanout at the trade deadline. Wasn't a fan of the Hagel trade. Wasn't a fan of how they handled the end of Corey Crawford in Chicago. They refused to bring him back in. There was just a lot of stuff that I think Jonathan Toews is just kind of sick of what's gone on there. And I think he's pretty vocal about that, even in the locker room, to media. He lets you know when he's frustrated, and I think he's very transparent, which, unlike guys like John Tavares, who wants to be with them and whatever, and then Pajama Boy comes out, at least Toews has been very open with the fact that he's probably not going to be in Chicago in 2024. So you're probably looking at Toews going. Now here comes the other equation. Well, he's getting paid $10.5 million. So I could see them moving him, in the start of next year. He's got the final year of his deal. Maybe a team's willing to retain the final year of his contract. Chicago would have to retain for 1 season. I could see them doing that. But even with that, you cut this contract in half, you're still looking at $5.25 million. Even if Chicago takes 50% of it, you're still paying over $5 million for a centerman that he's good, but he hasn't been at that same level. He's dealt with a lot of injury issues. This COVID thing really kind of shook him up. So at this point, we don't really know where Taze is at, even health-wise, let alone when he's actually on the ice. His production hasn't been that great. So what do you get for a guy like Taze? A guy that potentially, him and Kane, could have a statue in front of the United Center in the next decade. And you're going to trade him for a first and a fourth? Like, it's one of those things where it's like, where is his value? What is his market value? I think that Kyle Davidson will definitely do his research this summer just to try and see what the market is for Taze and if it's even worth trading him or not. So that's something to look at. Patrick Kane, looking at the two big boys here. Kane is a superstar in every right. There's a reason they call him Showtime. You know, he's one of those guys that he's definitely going to get a statue. And I think despite everything that happened when him and Taze were going to be on the cover, that those allegations about him, that's only the real hiccup he's had in his career. But Kane is just so talented on the ice. He is an X factor, and he's going to go for a lot. If they do decide to trade Kane, I think you're looking at a real overhaul for him. You could be looking at, you look at the price tag that the Blackhawks got for Brandon Hagel. They got 2 first-round picks and 2 fringe NHL players. You know Kane's going for definitely 2 first-round picks and probably 2 very solid prospects. So I think you're looking at a spot here where Kane and Taze, even if you don't move them together, which, that's $21 million, you're probably not realistically moving them together. Between the two of them, in terms of what they get for assets alone, those 2 guys could potentially fetch you 3 first-round picks and some depth players and really good prospects in the Kane deal. And then you throw in DeBrincat, again, who I think he wants to play with Patrick Kane. So if Kane gets traded, he might be like, listen, I'm 24 years old. I'm going into my prime. I don't want to be 29, 30 when this team starts to get good. I think he's going to want out as well. So you're looking at those top 3 guys probably being out of Chicago at this point. And this team looks totally different when you erase those guys. And just looking at it, let's take out Kane, Taze, and DeBrincat. Again, we're not adding what they'd bring in, but just subtracting those players, you have Tyler Johnson, Henrik Borgstrom, Dylan Strome, and Kirby Dach as your 4 centers. And give or take, because you have guys like Johnson and Kurashev that can also play center. But, you're looking at it gets very weak when those 3 guys are out of the equation. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about, because I think the Blackhawks, there's just so much that can change here. I think they're going to be really fun to watch this summer. There's a couple teams in particular that are going to be fun to watch. The Blackhawks, the Flyers, which I'm doing a video on them next, and I just did a video on them the other day, the Red Wings. And I think right now the most optimistic is the Red Wings, because they seem to be coming back up in terms of their trajectory compared to these two, where the expectations were so high this year for the Blackhawks and Flyers, and they fell just so short of that. This team struggled to, their ticket sales were good for the Blackhawks, but it wasn't that basically 100% that it's been. I think they were at 95% this year, which for the Blackhawks, an Original Six franchise in the Windy City, that is fairly low for the Blackhawks. So I think just the lack of direction, and obviously all the Kyle Beach stuff and the ownership stuff with, Rocky Wirtz, I think this organization has definitely taken a hit. I think they're just looking to flush the toilet, just completely tear this thing down and redo it. And I think that there's going to be a lot of things changing in Chicago. They need some guys that bring some tempo to the organization. I think that's going to be critical for them. They don't have a first-round pick this year, so that's going to be part of it. And I think they need to build the culture of what seems like they're looking for guys that are more up-tempo. You've got a guy like Kirby Dach who does not fit that bill, but you bring in guys that can fit that bill. You're looking at centers, guys that can just drive the offense for this team. I don't see them going big, big game hunting in free agency. It doesn't sound, realistic for them. What are you going to sell a guy like Goudreau or Nazem Kadri? Oh, look at this wonderful team we just destroyed and blew up. It's not going to happen. I'd say they need to get some goalie depth, but again, I mean, you got Delia and Lankinen. We're probably going to see a new tandem there, unless they decide to keep one or both of them. Lankinen had his points. I could see Delia going to the open market. They have a lot of draft picks in the first 3 rounds. They have 2 second-round picks, 3 third-round picks, and then the deeper part of the draft, they have no fourth, fifth, or first-round picks. So I wonder, with the draft picks that they do have, 5 picks in the second and third round, do they try to get their way back into the first round? It's going to be expensive, and I don't even know if they can do that. Maybe they're able to move up one of their second-round picks to a higher second-round pick. But these are all things that we're going to talk about, right? These are interesting things that when you look at the Blackhawks right now, they need to recoup some of their prospects and draft picks, and they need to get younger. And I think we are going to see the Blackhawks do that this summer. So guys, let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Of the guys I mentioned on the trade block, Dylan Strome, Kubalik, DeBrincat, Taze, and Kane, which of those 5 guys do you want to see traded, not get traded, as well as what do you think the core of this team is? There's just so many questions with this team. What's the culture of this team? What's the core? And of course, who's going to be the next head coach of the Chicago Blackhawks behind the bench opening night next season? Guys, thank you so much for watching, and let's go Hawks.